I woke up at 6:47 a.m. on October 3rd, and the first thing I felt was Marcus's side of the bed, cold, empty, untouched. My hand trembled as I pressed against the sheets because I knew exactly where he was. I knew because I had lived this day before. I had lived this entire miserable life before. The night before had been our fifth wedding anniversary. October 2nd, a date that should have meant something. In my previous life, I had spent that evening alone in our apartment, wearing the red dress I'd saved 3 months to buy, with takeout containers growing cold on the dining table, and tears ruining the makeup I'd spent an hour perfecting. I had called Marcus 17 times. 17. Each call went to voicemail. He had come home at 4 a.m., reeking of perfume and whiskey, and when I dared to ask where he'd been, he'd looked at me with such contempt that I'd actually taken a step back. "You're so fucking needy, Claire," he'd said. "It was just a work dinner that ran late. Why do you always have to make everything about you?" But I knew the truth now. I knew everything now. Because 3 weeks ago, or rather 3 weeks in my future, 6 months in my past, I had died. And somehow, impossibly, I had been given a second chance. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, and looked at my phone. October 3rd, 2019. I was 28 years old again. The calendar app showed our anniversary had passed, marked with the little heart emoji I'd added so hopefully. My messages to Marcus from the night before sat unanswered. "When are you coming home?" "Dinner is getting cold." "Marcus, please at least text me." The final message sent at 11:47 p.m. "Happy anniversary. I love you." One gray check mark, delivered but not read. In my first life, I had waited 3 more days before Marcus finally bothered to acknowledge what he'd done. "I forgot, okay?" He'd snapped. "I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you." He never did. And I, pathetic fool that I was, had believed him, had forgiven him, had convinced myself that his career as an investment banker was stressful, that his mother needed support, that his sister needed help with her startup, that I was asking for too much. I had made excuses for 6 more years. 6 years of missed birthdays, forgotten promises, and public humiliation. 6 years of his family treating me like an unpaid servant while Marcus looked the other way. 6 years of slowly dying inside until one day, my body decided to catch up with my spirit. The brain aneurysm had been quick, at least. One moment I was standing in Marcus's mother's kitchen, preparing dinner for 15 people, alone, as always, and the next, I was on the floor. I remembered the cold tile against my cheek. I remembered hearing Marcus's sister Jessica laugh in the next room, saying something about the help messing up again. I remembered thinking, as the darkness closed in, that I was 34 years old and I had nothing. No children because Marcus kept saying we'd wait until the timing was right. No career because he'd convinced me to quit my job as a graphic designer to support his career path. No friends because he'd systematically isolated me from them, calling them bad influences who made me difficult. I had died alone on that kitchen floor, and Marcus had found me 20 minutes later when he came to ask why dinner wasn't ready yet. I never got to see my own funeral, but I imagine it was sparsely attended. And then, impossibly, I had opened my eyes again. But instead of the hospital or the afterlife, I found myself in our old apartment, the smaller one we'd lived in before Marcus's big promotion. The calendar on my phone read October 3rd, 2019. Our fifth anniversary had just passed. I had been given a second chance, and I was not going to waste it. Now, sitting in bed with the morning light filtering through the curtains, I felt something I hadn't experienced in my first life at this moment. Clarity. Crystal clear, cold, absolute clarity. I knew exactly what was going to happen if I continued down this path. I knew about the work dinners that were actually affairs. I knew about the joint bank account that Marcus would slowly drain to fund Jessica's failing boutique. I knew about the credit cards he'd open in my name. I knew about his mother Patricia's plans to move in with us temporarily. A temporary arrangement that would last 3 years and cost me my sanity. I knew how the story ended, and I was going to rewrite it. I picked up my phone and opened my email. My fingers flew across the screen as I typed, "Attorney recommendations for divorce, immediate consultation needed." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I got out of bed, walked to the closet, and pulled out my laptop. The one Marcus didn't know the password to because I'd insisted on keeping one thing private. I opened a new document and titled it Evidence Log Day 1. I began to type everything I remembered. Every betrayal, every lie, every manipulation. The pattern was clear now, viewed through the lens of hindsight. Marcus hadn't suddenly become a bad husband. He'd always been this person. I'd just been too young, too in love, too eager to believe in the fairy tale to see it. But I saw it now, and I was going to make sure everyone else saw it too. The first time I met Marcus Ashford, I was 22 years old and working as a junior designer at a small creative agency in downtown Seattle. It was a Tuesday afternoon in spring, and I was grabbing coffee at the shop next to our office when a man in an expensive suit bumped into me, sending my latte cascading down the front of my favorite blouse. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. He'd been genuinely apologetic, immediately offering to pay for dry cleaning, buy me a new coffee, replace my shirt. His smile was dazzling. His eyes were warm. His hand, when he reached out to steady me, was gentle. I should have known better. I should have seen the Rolex on his wrist, the designer briefcase, the way he automatically assumed that throwing money at a problem would fix it. But I was young and flattered, and when he asked for my number, to make sure the dry cleaning bill gets handled, I gave it to him. He called that evening. We went on our first date 3 days later. He was charming, attentive, interested in my work. He asked questions about my designs, my dreams, my family. He listened, or at least he seemed to. The red flags were there from the beginning, but I was too dazzled to notice them. The way he'd check his phone constantly during dinner. The way he'd make jokes about my adorable little job compared to his real career in finance. The way he'd introduce me to his friends as the cute girl I'm seeing, rather than using my name. His family was worse. I met Patricia Ashford, Marcus's mother, 3 months into our relationship. She lived in a sprawling house in the wealthy suburb of Medina, the kind of place with a circular driveway and columns flanking the front door. Marcus had insisted I dress conservatively. Mom's pretty traditional, so I'd worn a knee-length skirt and a cardigan despite the warm weather. Patricia had looked me up and down like I was a stain on her carpet. "So, you're the girl Marcus has been spending time with?" she'd said, not offering her hand. "He mentioned you work in, what was it, arts and crafts?" "Graphic design," I'd corrected softly. "I work for a creative agency. We do branding for..." How nice. She'd already turned away, dismissing me. "Marcus, darling, come help me with the tea service. Your father wants to discuss the Peterson account with you." I had stood in that ornate living room, alone, for 20 minutes, before Marcus's sister, Jessica, had wandered in. She was 2 years younger than Marcus, beautiful in that effortless way of people who'd never worried about money, and she'd looked at me with barely concealed amusement. "You're the graphic designer," she'd said, making it sound like an insult. "That's so bohemian. Marcus usually dates women from better backgrounds. You know, professionals, lawyers, doctors, other bankers." "I am a professional," I'd said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have a degree in..." "Well, sure." Jessica had waved her hand dismissively. "Well, don't get too comfortable. Marcus gets bored easily. Last girlfriend lasted 4 months. The one before that, 3. Mom's already picked out the girl he's actually going to marry, Catherine Beaumont. Her father owns half of downtown." I should have left then. I should have called an Uber, walked out of that house, and blocked Marcus's number. But when he finally came back, full of apologies and explanations about his demanding family, I let him sweep me up in his arms. I let him take me to an expensive dinner and buy me flowers and promise that his family would warm up to me eventually. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. We got engaged 18 months later. Marcus proposed at a fancy restaurant, and I said yes through happy tears, ignoring the way Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes when we told her the news. Ignoring the way Jessica immediately started planning her vision for the wedding without asking me what I wanted. Ignoring the way Marcus's father, Thomas, barely looked up from his phone when Marcus announced we'd set a date. The wedding was a nightmare. Patricia took over every decision, vetoing the venue I wanted, too informal. The dress I'd chosen, not elegant enough for the Ashford name. And even most of my guest list. "We can't possibly accommodate all your little friends, dear. We have business associates to invite." I walked down the aisle in a dress I hated, toward a family I was beginning to fear, and when Marcus said his vows, I told myself that once we were married, things would be different. They were different. They were worse. Marcus convinced me to quit my job 3 months after the wedding. You don't need to work, he'd said. My salary is more than enough for both of us. Besides, my career requires a lot of entertaining, networking events. I need you available to be my partner in that. It sounded romantic at the time, like he valued me as his partner, his equal. I didn't realize he meant he needed a pretty accessory who could smile at his boss and make small talk with clients' wives. I quit my job. It was the biggest mistake of my first life. Without my career, my identity slowly eroded. I wasn't Claire the designer anymore. I was Mrs. Ashford, Marcus's wife, Patricia's daughter-in-law, the woman who organized dinner parties and remembered everyone's birthdays and smiled through another evening of listening to Thomas drone on about the stock market. The years blurred together in my memory now. Year 1, hopeful, still trying to make it work. Year 2, confused about why I felt so empty. Year 3, depressed, isolated from my friends because Marcus always had some reason why I couldn't see them. Year 4, numb, just going through the motions. Year 5, the missed anniversary that started my final spiral. Year 6, trapped, desperate, drowning. And then I died. The day I died, I'd spent 8 hours cooking for Marcus's family. It was Thanksgiving, and Patricia had decided we were hosting at the kids' place because she wanted to give Claire something to do. Never mind that our apartment was half the size of her house. Never mind that I'd been suffering from terrible headaches for weeks, and Marcus kept telling me I was being dramatic when I asked him to take me to the doctor. I made a turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce from scratch, 3 types of pie, and homemade rolls. I set a table for 15. I polished silver that Patricia had insisted we use. I did it all alone because Marcus was helping Dad with something important in the living room, which meant watching football. When everyone arrived, no one thanked me. Patricia criticized the turkey. A bit dry, dear. Jessica complained about the wine selection. Couldn't you have gotten something better than this grocery store brand? Marcus's cousin made a joke about at least being able to eat for free at their place. I was carrying the pies to the table when the pain hit. It felt like someone had driven a spike through the back of my skull. The room tilted. I heard someone scream. I think it was me. And then I was falling. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Marcus's face. Not worried or scared, just annoyed. Annoyed that I was ruining Thanksgiving. Annoyed that I was making a scene in front of his family. I died thinking I had failed him. Now I knew the truth. I hadn't failed him. He had failed me. They all had. And in this second life, I was going to make sure they faced the consequences. By 9 a.m., I'd scheduled consultations with 3 divorce attorneys. By 10 a.m., I'd opened a new bank account in only my name and transferred half the money from our joint savings. Money I'd brought into the marriage from selling my small condo before we got married. Marcus had convinced me to combine our finances for simplicity, but I'd been the one with savings. His accounts had been nearly empty, drained by his expensive tastes and his habit of covering Jessica's expenses. By 11 a.m., I was sitting in a lawyer's office. Diane Morrison was in her 50s, with steel gray hair and eyes that had clearly seen every trick in the divorce playbook. She listened as I explained my situation, her expression growing more grim with each detail. "Let me make sure I understand," she said when I finished. "You've been married for 5 years. You left your career at his request. He's the primary earner. You have no children. And last night, he missed your anniversary without explanation." "He was with another woman," I said. The words felt powerful, even though I had no proof yet. "I don't have evidence yet, but I know he was—" Diane raised an eyebrow. "That's a strong accusation without proof." "I'll get proof," I said. In my previous life, I hadn't discovered Marcus's affairs until year 8, when I'd accidentally seen texts on his phone. But I knew they'd started much earlier. I knew the patterns now, the late nights, the mysterious charges on credit cards, the perfume that wasn't mine. But regardless of infidelity, I want a divorce. What do I need to do? "In Washington, we have no-fault divorce," Diane explained. "You don't need to prove adultery or abuse. You just need to file." However, given that you left your career and have been out of the workforce for several years, you'd likely be entitled to spousal support during the dissolution process and potentially alimony afterward. I don't want his money, I said. I want out. I understand the sentiment, Diane said carefully, but I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't advise you to think practically. You gave up your career for this marriage. You're entitled to compensation for that sacrifice. I thought about the next 6 years. The isolation, the manipulation, the slow death of my spirit, the credit card debt Marcus would accumulate, the money he'd loaned to Jessica that would never be repaid, the legal fees I'd face in my previous life when Patricia sued me over some imaginary slight. I want what I'm entitled to, I said, and I want to make sure he can't hide assets or drain accounts before the divorce is finalized. Diane smiled for the first time. Now we're talking, let's discuss strategy. We spent 2 hours going over Washington's community property laws. Everything acquired during the marriage would be split 50/50ths unless we could prove separate property. My premarital savings, what was left of them, were mine. His salary from before the marriage was his. Everything else was community property. The key is going to be documentation, Diane said. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts. If he's been using marital funds for affairs or giving money to family members without your knowledge, we can argue for a larger share of the assets. What if I could prove he's planning to hide assets? I asked carefully. That would be very useful, Diane said. But be careful about how you obtain information. We can't use evidence that was illegally obtained. I nodded, my mind already racing. I knew what was coming. In 2 weeks, Marcus would move a significant amount of money from our joint account to an account in Jessica's name, claiming it was a business investment. In a month, he'd open 3 credit cards in my name without my knowledge. In 3 months, he'd convinced me to sign documents that I didn't fully understand, giving his family access to my inheritance from my grandmother, but none of that had happened yet. This time, I would be ready. File the papers, I said. Today, if possible. That eager? Diane asked. You have no idea, I said. I was home by 2 p.m. Marcus still hadn't called or texted. In my previous life, he wouldn't contact me until tomorrow afternoon, with a breezy apology and an excuse about his phone dying. This time, I wasn't going to sit around waiting. I went through our apartment with new eyes, seeing it for what it was. A cage I'd decorated myself. The tasteful art on the walls that Patricia had chosen. The expensive furniture that Marcus had insisted on, even though we couldn't afford it. The kitchen where I'd cooked countless meals for his family, never receiving a word of thanks. I started documenting everything. I took photos of every room, every piece of furniture, every item of value. I opened Marcus's desk drawer. He'd never bothered to lock it because he didn't think I'd snoop, and found exactly what I remembered. Bank statements showing transfers to Jessica, receipts from expensive restaurants on nights he'd claimed to be working late, and a credit card bill with charges at a boutique hotel downtown. I photographed everything. I uploaded the photos to a cloud storage account Marcus didn't know about. I was methodical, thorough, and completely calm. This was the advantage of foreknowledge. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't confused. I wasn't desperately trying to understand why my husband was treating me this way. I knew why. He was treating me this way because he could. Because he'd always seen me as lesser, as controllable, as someone who would accept whatever scraps of affection he deigned to throw my way. My phone rang at 4:37 p.m. Marcus, right on schedule. In my first life, he'd called at 4:40, but close enough. Hey, babe, he said when I answered. His voice was casual, unworried. He had no idea what was coming. Sorry I didn't call earlier. Crazy day at work. Where were you last night? I asked. My voice was steady, no tears, no accusations, just a question. I told you, work dinner, the Peterson account. It ran really late and I ended up crashing at Dave's place. My phone died. Dave Chen had been Marcus's roommate in college. In my first life, I'd believed this lie. I'd even called Dave's wife Sarah to chat, and she'd cheerfully confirmed that Marcus had stayed over, never mentioning that Dave had actually been out of town at a conference. I hadn't discovered that detail until years later. This time I knew better. Did you realize what day yesterday was? I asked. There was a pause, a long pause. Uh, Tuesday. Our anniversary, Marcus. October 2nd, our 5th wedding anniversary. Oh, shit. He tried to sound genuinely apologetic. Babe, I'm so sorry. It completely slipped my mind with everything going on at work. I'll make it up to you, I promise. How about dinner this weekend? Anywhere you want. In my first life, I'd accepted this. I'd convinced myself that it was an honest mistake, that his career was stressful, that I was being too demanding. I'd gone to dinner that weekend, where Marcus had spent most of the meal on his phone and then complained about the prices on the menu. Don't bother, I said. I don't think dinner is going to fix this. Claire, come on, don't be like this. I said I was sorry. You'll be served with divorce papers tomorrow, I said. I've already hired an attorney. I suggest you do the same. The silence that followed was beautiful. I could practically hear his brain stuttering, trying to process what I'd just said. What? He finally managed. Claire, what are you talking about? This is insane. You want a divorce because I forgot our anniversary? No, I said calmly. I want a divorce because you've never respected me. Your family treats me like garbage, and I'm done pretending this marriage is something it's not. You're being hysterical, he said, his voice hardening. We're not getting divorced. You're upset because I missed one dinner. I'm not being hysterical. I'm being rational, probably for the first time in this marriage. What the hell has gotten into you? Now he sounded angry. Did one of your idiot friends put these ideas in your head? This is ridiculous. I'm coming home right now and we're going to talk about this like adults. Don't bother, I said. I won't be here. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. You'll be formally served tomorrow at your office. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, not with fear or sadness, but with adrenaline, with power, with the absolute certainty that I was doing the right thing. Marcus called back immediately. I declined the call. He called again, declined. He sent a barrage of texts. This is crazy. You're overreacting. We need to talk. Claire, answer me. I'm calling my mother. That last one made me smile. Of course he was calling Patricia. In my first life, Patricia would have immediately launched a campaign to talk sense into me, which really meant bullying me into submission. She'd show up at the apartment, crying about how I was destroying her son's life, how ungrateful I was, how she'd always known I wasn't good enough for the Ashford family. This time, I was ready for her too. Patricia Ashford arrived at 6:15 p.m., letting herself in with the spare key Marcus had given her without my permission. I'd been waiting in the living room, my suitcase packed by the door. Claire, she said, her voice dripping with false concern. Marcus called me. He's devastated. He said you're threatening divorce over a simple misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, I said. And it's not a threat. The papers will be filed tomorrow. Patricia's mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation underneath. You ungrateful little girl. After everything we've done for you, we welcomed you into this family, gave you a life you never could have achieved on your own, and this is how you repay us. Welcomed me? I laughed. It felt good. Patricia, you've treated me like a servant from day one. You've criticized everything I do, taken over every aspect of my life, and poisoned my husband against me. I'm done. How dare you speak to me that way? Her face was flushed now, genuinely angry. Marcus can do so much better than you. You have no education, no breeding, no class. I told him from the beginning that you were a mistake. In my first life, these words had cut deep. They'd confirmed every insecurity I'd felt about not being good enough for the Ashford family. They'd made me try harder, sacrifice more, shrink myself smaller. Now they just made me tired. Then I'm sure he'll have no problem signing the divorce papers, I said. Goodbye, Patricia. I won't be seeing you again. I picked up my suitcase and walked past her, out the door, and into the rest of my life. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and strategic planning. Diane Morrison was worth every penny of her substantial hourly rate. She was ruthless, efficient, and had absolutely no patience for the Ashford family's attempts at intimidation. Marcus refused to be served at his office, too embarrassing in front of his colleagues, so the process server finally caught him at home. According to Diane, he'd tried to refuse the papers, then threatened to sue me for defamation, then called her 17 times in one afternoon demanding to know what kind of lawyer helps a wife destroy a marriage over nothing. Diane had calmly informed him that I was within my legal rights, that Washington was a no-fault divorce state, and that if he didn't retain his own counsel immediately, he'd be at a significant disadvantage in proceedings. He hired Charles Whitmore, a bulldog attorney known for representing wealthy men in contentious divorces. Whitmore immediately filed a motion to freeze all marital assets, claiming I was a flight risk who might drain the accounts. Diane filed a counter-motion pointing out that I'd only taken what I'd brought into the marriage plus half of our current savings, and that Marcus had a history of unauthorized transfers. She'd included the photos I'd taken of the bank statements showing payments to Jessica. The judge denied Whitmore's motion and issued a temporary order preventing either of us from moving, selling, or hiding assets until the divorce was finalized. 2 weeks after I filed, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Jessica. "You bitch," she hissed when I answered. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Marcus is a wreck. Mom is having heart palpitations. Dad says you're trying to ruin the family's reputation." "Tell your family I said hello," I replied, and hung up. She called back immediately. I blocked the number, but Jessica wasn't done. She started a campaign on social media, posting vague but pointed status updates about ungrateful women who use men for money and status, then abandon them the second things get hard. Her friends who'd never met me but were happy to pile on left sympathetic comments about poor Marcus. I didn't respond, I didn't engage. I just documented everything, screenshots, saved posts, recorded dates and times. All of it went into a folder labeled harassment, because I knew where this was going. In my first life, Jessica's boutique had failed within 2 years, and she'd sued Marcus for the return of his investment. The lawsuit had dragged on, costing thousands in legal fees. And when that failed, she'd turned on me, claiming I'd somehow sabotaged her business out of jealousy. This time, I was building a paper trail. When Jessica inevitably tried to blame me for her failures, I'd have proof that I'd been completely uninvolved. The discovery phase of the divorce was illuminating even for me. Diane subpoenaed Marcus's bank records, credit card statements, and phone records. What we found confirmed my memories and revealed even more. Marcus had been having affairs, plural, for most of our marriage. The credit card statements showed regular charges at the boutique hotel, at expensive lingerie stores, at restaurants that were decidedly romantic. His phone records showed hundreds of calls and texts to several different numbers, all belonging to women I didn't know. One of them was Emily Chen, Dave's sister. The irony was not lost on me. Marcus had claimed to stay at Dave's place while actually sleeping with Dave's sister in a hotel. But the affairs weren't even the worst part. The financial abuse was staggering. Over the course of our marriage, Marcus had transferred over $200,000 from our joint accounts to Jessica's various business ventures. He'd opened 4 credit cards in my name without my knowledge, something that wasn't even possible without forging my signature. He'd convinced me to sign papers that I thought were for our taxes, but were actually putting my inheritance from my grandmother into a trust controlled by Thomas Ashford. Diane was furious. "This isn't just grounds for divorce," she said, laying out the documents. "This is fraud, identity theft, financial elder abuse. Technically, since the inheritance was from your grandmother. Claire, we can press charges." I stared at the papers, my memories aligning with the evidence. All those times, Marcus had said we needed to tighten our budget while simultaneously sending thousands to his sister. All those times he'd told me I was bad with money when I questioned expenses. All those times I'd felt crazy, like I was imagining problems that didn't exist. "I want him to pay," I said. "Not just in the divorce. I want criminal charges." "That's going to make things messier," Diane warned, "and longer. Are you sure you want to go that route?" I thought about dying on that kitchen floor, about wasting 6 more years of my life serving a family that despised me, about every moment of gaslighting, every tear I'd cried, every piece of myself I'd lost. And "I'm sure," I said. When Marcus found out I was pressing criminal charges, he lost his mind. He showed up at the hotel where I was staying. I'd chosen one with excellent security after Patricia tried to ambush me at a coffee shop and caused such a scene that the police were called. "You crazy bitch!" he shouted in the lobby while I stood safely behind the security desk. I gave you everything. You were nothing when I met you. I made you. The police removed him. I filed a restraining order. Diane added the incident to our growing list of Marcus's unstable and potentially dangerous behaviors. The criminal investigation moved forward. The detective assigned to the case, a patient woman named Sarah Rodriguez, interviewed me extensively about the timeline of Marcus's financial abuse. She was particularly interested in the forged signatures on the credit card applications. "This is pretty cut and dried," she said after our third meeting. "He's going to face charges for identity theft at minimum, possibly fraud depending on what the DA decides to pursue. Are you prepared for how this might play out? He's going to say you're vindictive, that this is about the divorce, that you're lying." "I'm prepared," I said. "I have documentation of everything." And I did. Diane had done a masterful job of organizing our case. Every bank statement, every forged signature, every suspicious transaction was cataloged and explained. The pattern was clear. Marcus Ashford was a con artist who'd targeted a young, naive woman and systematically drained her resources while manipulating her into believing she was the problem. The DA agreed to press charges. Marcus was arrested at his office, his worst nightmare, being publicly humiliated in front of his colleagues. The local news picked up the story. Investment banker charged with identity theft and fraud against wife. Patricia called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer once. The divorce trial was set for 6 months after I filed. In the meantime, the criminal case proceeded in parallel. Marcus's attorney tried everything to get the charges dropped, claiming I was a vengeful spouse, that it was a misunderstanding about joint finances, that I'd actually given him permission for everything but was lying now. But the evidence didn't lie. The handwriting analyst confirmed the signatures on the credit card applications weren't mine. The bank records showed the pattern of deception. And most damningly, one of Marcus's former girlfriends, a woman named Stephanie, who he'd dated briefly during our marriage, came forward with her own story of financial manipulation. Apparently, Marcus had a type: young, trusting women with some money of their own. Stephanie had been dating him when he was still married to me, though she hadn't known it at the time. He'd convinced her to invest in Jessica's boutique, promising huge returns. She'd lost $50,000. When she'd confronted him, he'd ghosted her. Her testimony was devastating to Marcus's defense. The jury saw a pattern. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a marital dispute. This was a predator who had targeted multiple women. Marcus was convicted of identity theft and fraud. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. He was also ordered to pay restitution, every penny he'd stolen from me, plus interest and penalties. The Ashford family blamed me, of course. Patricia testified as a character witness for Marcus, sobbing about what a good son he was, how I'd corrupted him, how he'd never been in trouble before meeting me. The jury hadn't been impressed. They'd seen the evidence of affairs, of manipulation, of financial abuse spanning years. Jessica tried to organize a protest outside the courthouse, claiming I was a gold digger who'd trapped Marcus. It fell apart when only 3 people showed up, one of whom was a random guy who thought it was a different protest about parking tickets. Thomas Ashford, showing a hint of survival instinct his wife and daughter lacked, quietly transferred the trust containing my grandmother's inheritance back to me. His lawyer sent a terse note explaining this was in the interest of settling all matters without further legal entanglement. Translation: he knew I could sue him for his role in the scheme and he wanted to make it go away. I accepted the transfer. It was my money anyway. The divorce was finalized 8 months after I filed. By that point, Marcus was 3 months into his prison sentence and in no position to fight. His attorney advised him to accept the settlement Diane proposed. I would keep my inheritance, my premarital savings, and half of all marital assets. Marcus would keep his pension and his car. We'd split the apartment proceeds when it sold, though given the market and the fact that we still owed on the mortgage, that wouldn't amount to much. Marcus would not pay alimony. I'd waived it in exchange for him signing the papers without further contest. I didn't want to be connected to him for one more day than necessary. Judge Rachel Morrison, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed the settlement agreement with obvious approval. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, looking at me over her reading glasses, "I've reviewed the documents related to this case, including the criminal proceedings. I want to commend you for your courage in coming forward about the abuse you suffered. Too many people stay silent. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. Mr. Ashford. She turned to Marcus, who was appearing via video link from the county jail. I'm granting this divorce. Let me be clear. The evidence presented in both the criminal and civil proceedings paints a picture of sustained financial and emotional abuse. You used your position as the primary earner to control and manipulate your wife. You stole her identity, her money, and years of her life. The fact that you're facing criminal consequences is appropriate. I hope you use your time in prison to reflect on your actions. Marcus's face on the screen was tight with anger, but he said nothing. What could he say? The evidence was overwhelming. This court grants the dissolution of marriage, Judge Morrison said, striking her gavel. You are no longer married. Good luck to you both. I walked out of that courtroom divorced, vindicated, and free. The first year after my divorce was spent rebuilding. I rented a small studio apartment in Capitol Hill in a neighborhood I'd always loved, but Marcus had deemed too bohemian. I reached out to old friends I'd lost touch with, offering apologies and explanations. Most were understanding. Some were hurt by my years of distance, but several were willing to give our friendships another chance. I enrolled in classes to update my design skills. The industry had changed in the years I'd been out of it, and I needed to catch up on new software and trends. It was humbling being a beginner again at 34, well, technically 29 this time around. But it felt good to have purpose beyond serving someone else's family. The money from my grandmother's inheritance gave me a cushion. It wasn't a fortune, about $300,000, but it was enough to support myself while I rebuilt my career. I was careful with it, investing wisely, living modestly. I started freelancing, taking small design jobs to build a portfolio. A logo here, a website there. Nothing glamorous, but it was mine. I was creating again, and it felt like coming back to life. I also started therapy. Dr. Andrea Walsh was in her 40s, with kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciated. She specialized in trauma and abuse recovery, and she helped me process not just what Marcus had done, but why I'd allowed it to happen. You were young, she said during one session, and you were groomed, essentially. Marcus and his family found a target, someone kind, talented, eager to please, and they exploited those qualities. That's not your fault. I feel like I should have known, I said. There were so many signs. Hindsight is 20/20ths, Dr. Walsh said, and abusers are good at what they do. They isolate you, make you doubt yourself, convince you that you're the problem. Breaking free from that takes tremendous strength. You should be proud of yourself. I was learning to be proud, learning to trust my own judgment again, learning that I was enough, just as I was, without needing to shrink myself to fit someone else's expectations. 18 months after I filed for divorce, my design career was back on track. I'd landed several good clients, including a tech startup that needed a complete rebrand. The project was challenging and exciting, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was using my brain for something meaningful, and I was also casually dating. Nothing serious, I wasn't ready for that, but it was nice to remember that I was attractive, interesting, worthy of respect. The men I met actually listened when I talked. They asked about my work. They paid for their own dinners without making a production of it. They understood that no meant no, and I need to take things slow didn't mean convince me otherwise. It was shocking how different healthy relationships looked compared to what I'd had with Marcus. One evening, I was at a gallery opening with my friend Melissa. We'd reconnected after the divorce, and she'd been incredibly supportive. When I saw Patricia Ashford across the room, she was wearing an expensive dress and her signature pearls, holding a glass of champagne, and looking supremely uncomfortable in the contemporary art space. She spotted me at the same moment. Her face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally settling on disdain. She walked over. I considered leaving, but something made me stay. "Claire," she said coldly, "I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think this would be your scene." "Hello, Patricia," I said evenly. "I'm here supporting a friend's work." I gestured to one of Melissa's paintings on the wall, a vibrant abstract piece. "How nice." Patricia's eyes flicked to the painting dismissively. "I suppose you have a lot of free time now, since you destroyed my son's life." Melissa stiffened beside me, ready to jump to my defense, but I touched her arm gently. I had this. Your son destroyed his own life, I said calmly. He made choices. He committed crimes. He faced consequences. That's how the adult world works. He's in prison because of you. Patricia's voice was shaking now, the refined facade cracking. My son, in prison, like a common criminal. The humiliation, the shame, all because you couldn't handle a simple marriage. A simple marriage, I repeated. Is that what you call systematic financial abuse, identity theft, and fraud? Simple. He made mistakes, Patricia hissed. Young men make mistakes. You could have handled it privately, but no. You had to destroy him publicly. You had to involve the police, the media, everyone. You're vindictive and cruel. I'm a survivor, I said, and I'm not interested in rehashing this with you. Marcus made his choices. You enabled them. Jessica profited from them. You're all reaping what you sowed. How dare you? I dare because I'm free, I said. Free of Marcus, free of you, free of your family's toxicity, and I'm thriving. Are you? Patricia's mouth opened and closed. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment she realized the truth. I wasn't the scared young woman she'd bullied for years. I wasn't desperate for her approval or afraid of her criticism. I was completely indifferent to her opinion, and that, more than anything else, infuriated her. You'll regret this, she said finally. You'll end up alone and miserable, and you'll realize you threw away the best thing that ever happened to you. I'm happier alone than I ever was with your son, I said. Goodbye, Patricia. I turned and walked away, Melissa following. Behind me, I heard Patricia sputter something else, but I didn't care enough to listen. That was amazing, Melissa whispered. You were so calm, I wanted to punch her. She's not worth the anger anymore, I said, and I meant it. 2 years after filing for divorce, 3 years after my rebirth, I received news that Marcus was up for parole. He'd served 18 months of his 3-year sentence and was presenting himself as a reformed man who'd undergone extensive therapy and was ready to rejoin society. The parole board invited me to submit a victim impact statement. I thought about declining. I'd moved on, built a new life, and didn't want to be dragged back into the drama, but then I thought about other women. Women who might be fooled by Marcus's charm, his expensive suits, his practiced smile. Women who might not recognize the warning signs until it was too late. I wrote the statement. I detailed the abuse, the manipulation, the systematic destruction of my identity and finances. I explained how he'd isolated me, gaslit me, and stolen from me. I described the therapy I'd needed, the years of my life I'd lost, the way I still sometimes woke up in a panic, afraid I was back in that apartment with him. I also noted that Marcus had shown no genuine remorse. His attorney's statement to the parole board claimed he'd been wrongly convicted, that I'd fabricated evidence, and that he was the real victim of a vengeful ex-wife. That didn't sound like someone who'd learned anything. The parole board denied his request. He'd serve his full sentence. Patricia sent me a hate-filled email. I deleted it without reading past the first line. 3 years after my rebirth, I opened my own design studio. It was small, just me and 2 junior designers, but it was mine. We specialized in branding for small businesses and nonprofits, the kind of work that felt meaningful. Our clients were people who cared about what they were building, who valued creativity and collaboration. I named the studio Revive Design. It felt appropriate. I was sitting in my office one afternoon reviewing mock-ups for a new client when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Claire, it's Jessica. I should have hung up immediately, but curiosity got the better of me. What do you want? She sounded different, tired, less arrogant. I wanted to apologize. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You wanted to what? I know you have no reason to believe me, Jessica said. But I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of therapy, and I realize I was awful to you. My whole family was awful to you. You didn't deserve any of what we put you through. No, I agreed. I didn't. Marcus is getting out in a few months, she continued, and I've been dreading it because I realize he's exactly like Mom and Dad. He's manipulative and cruel, and he only cares about himself. And I spent so many years helping him, enabling him, because that's what our family does. We protect each other, even when we're wrong. Jessica, why are you telling me this? Because I don't want to be that person anymore, she said. I don't want to be Patricia Ashford's daughter or Marcus Ashford's sister. I want to be better. And I thought I should start by apologizing to the person I hurt most. I was quiet for a moment, processing. This could be a manipulation, another Ashford scheme. But something in Jessica's voice sounded genuine. I appreciate the apology, I said finally, but I don't think we'll be having any kind of relationship going forward. Too much damage has been done. I understand, Jessica said. I wanted you to know that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone. Then I saved the number, not to call her back, but to make sure I'd know if she tried to contact me again, and went back to work. Some apologies are too little too late. But at least it was acknowledgement. After years of being gaslit, told I was crazy and vindictive and wrong, it felt good to hear someone from that family admit the truth, even if it didn't change anything. 4 years after my rebirth, Marcus Ashford was released from prison. I heard about it through my attorney. Diane kept tabs on him just in case he tried to contact me or cause trouble. She advised me to be cautious, to make sure my home security was updated, to vary my routines. I did all of that, but I wasn't afraid. Marcus couldn't hurt me anymore. I'd taken away his power the moment I filed those divorce papers. He tried to contact me once through a burner email account. The message was long, rambling, full of justifications and excuses and veiled threats. He claimed he'd been wrongly imprisoned, that I'd ruined his life, that he deserved a chance to tell his side of the story. I forwarded it to Detective Rodriguez and blocked the address. She called to tell me they'd issued a warning to Marcus about violating the restraining order, which was still in effect for another year. He didn't try again. I heard through mutual acquaintances, the kind of gossip that travels through Seattle's business community, that Marcus was struggling to find work. His conviction made him unemployable in finance, and his reputation was thoroughly destroyed. He was living with Patricia, which I'm sure made them both miserable. I felt no sympathy, none at all. He'd made his choices. Now he was living with the consequences. 5 years after my rebirth, I met someone. His name was Daniel, and he was a client initially. He ran a nonprofit providing free legal services to domestic violence survivors. He'd come to me for a website redesign and had been immediately respectful, professional, and genuinely interested in my creative vision. We'd worked together for 3 months before he asked me out. Even then, he'd been careful to make sure I didn't feel pressured, explaining that he valued our professional relationship and would understand completely if I wanted to keep things that way. I said yes. And for the first time since my rebirth, I felt ready for a real relationship. Daniel was everything Marcus wasn't. He was kind without being weak. He was successful without being arrogant. He listened when I talked about my past without trying to fix me or minimize what I'd been through. He understood boundaries. He celebrated my successes without feeling threatened. He made me laugh without making me the butt of the joke. 6 months into our relationship, he met my friends. They loved him. Melissa pulled me aside at dinner and whispered, "This one's a keeper. He looks at you like you're the most fascinating person in the room." "Because he actually thinks I am," I whispered back. A year into our relationship, we moved in together. Not because I needed him financially or because he pressured me, but because we wanted to build a life together. We found an apartment with room for both of our home offices, with a kitchen where we could cook together, with light streaming through the windows. It was nothing like the cage I'd lived in with Marcus. 6 years after my rebirth, I was sitting in my office when Diane called. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. We'd stayed friendly after the divorce, but I hadn't needed legal services since then. "Claire," she said, "I thought you should know. Marcus Ashford was arrested again." My stomach dropped. "For what?" "Fraud. He was running a cryptocurrency investment scheme, targeting young women through dating apps. One of them got suspicious and reported him to the police. When they investigated, they found he'd scammed at least 10 other women out of a combined total of over $400,000. I closed my eyes. Some people never learned. He's probably going away for a long time, Diane continued. The DA is pushing for the maximum sentence given his prior conviction. He's a repeat offender, and the judge isn't going to be lenient. Good, I said. Maybe this time it'll stick. How are you doing? Diane asked. I know this must bring up difficult memories. I'm okay, I said, and I meant it. I'm more than okay, actually. I have a life I love, work I'm proud of, and people who value me. Marcus Ashford is just a bad chapter that I've moved past. I'm glad to hear that, Diane said warmly. You've come so far from that woman who walked into my office 5 years ago. After we hung up, I sat for a moment, thinking about that younger version of myself. The woman who'd woken up with the knowledge of her terrible future and decided to change it. The woman who'd been so scared, but so determined. I was proud of her. I was proud of me. 6.5 years after my rebirth, 6 months after my 35th birthday in this timeline, Daniel proposed. We were on a hike in the Cascades, at a viewpoint overlooking a crystal-clear lake, and he got down on one knee and said, Claire, you're the strongest, most remarkable person I've ever met. Will you marry me? I said yes without hesitation. We planned a small wedding, just close friends and family. My parents, who'd been quietly supportive through everything. My brother, Daniel's sister and parents, and a few dozen friends. No fancy venue, no elaborate ceremony, no guest list full of business associates. Just people we loved, who loved us back. The wedding was everything my first wedding hadn't been. Joyful, personal, authentic. I wore a dress I actually liked. We wrote our own vows. We served food we enjoyed, played music we loved, and danced until our feet hurt. Marcus Ashford wasn't invited, obviously. He was in prison anyway, awaiting trial for his latest charges. Patricia wasn't invited either. Neither was Jessica, despite her apology years ago. Some bridges were burned beyond repair, but I wasn't sad about their absence. I was happy about who was there. During our first dance, Daniel pulled me close and whispered, Happy? Completely, I said. For the first time in either of my lives, I'm completely happy. He looked confused. I'd never told him about the rebirth, and I never would. How could I explain that I'd lived this life before, that I'd died and come back, that I'd been given an impossible second chance? But he didn't need to understand the literal truth to understand the important truth, that I'd escaped something terrible and built something beautiful. I'm glad, he said simply, and kissed me. 7 years after my rebirth, I received news that Patricia Ashford had passed away. Heart attack. She was 68 years old. Jessica called to tell me. We hadn't spoken in years, but apparently she felt I should know. The funeral is next Wednesday, she said. I'm not asking you to come. I know you won't. I thought you'd want to know. Thank you for telling me, I said. And Jessica, I'm sorry for your loss. She never changed, you know, Jessica said quietly. Right up until the end, she insisted Marcus was innocent, that you were the villain, that the family had been wronged. She died angry and bitter and alone. Dad had moved into his own apartment 2 years ago. He couldn't stand being around her constant rage anymore. That's sad, I said. And I meant it, not sad enough to regret my choices, but sad in the way any wasted life is sad. I wish she could have been different, Jessica said. I wish we all could have been different, before it was too late. It's not too late for you, I said. You're not Patricia, you're not Marcus. You can still choose to be better. I'm trying, Jessica said. I really am. After we hung up, I sat with Daniel on our couch. We'd bought a house together a year ago, a charming craftsman with a garden I was slowly learning to tend, and told him about Patricia's death. How do you feel? He asked. Relieved, I said honestly, and a little sad. She could have been a different person. She chose not to be, and now she's gone, and the world is neither better nor worse for it. That's a pretty balanced perspective, Daniel observed. I've had a lot of therapy, I said, and he laughed. 8 years after my rebirth, Marcus Ashford was convicted of his second set of fraud charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. With his prior conviction and his violation of parole, he'd likely serve the full sentence. He'd be nearly 60 when he got out. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to. That chapter of my life was fully closed. Instead, I spent that day working on a new project. My design studio was expanding. We were hiring 3 more designers, moving into a larger space, taking on bigger clients. I was building something real, something lasting, something entirely mine. In the evening, Daniel and I cooked dinner together. We talked about our days, made plans for the weekend, debated what to watch on TV. It was ordinary and domestic and absolutely perfect. As I was falling asleep that night, I thought about the woman I'd been in my first life. The woman who died on a kitchen floor, surrounded by people who didn't love her, having wasted her entire adult life trying to earn affection from those who were incapable of giving it. I thought about the moment I'd woken up with a second chance, the decision I'd made to file for divorce, the fear and courage and determination that had carried me through. I thought about everything I'd gained: my career, my friends, my self-respect, my health, and eventually, Daniel. A real partnership with a good man who saw me as an equal. And I thought about everything Marcus and Patricia and the entire Ashford family had lost. Each other, their reputations, their freedom, their chance at happiness. They'd lost all of that because they'd chosen cruelty over kindness, greed over generosity, pride over growth. I'd gained everything because I'd chosen to value myself. In the darkness, I reached for Daniel's hand. He stirred slightly, squeezed my fingers, and settled back into sleep. I closed my eyes, grateful for my second chance, and more grateful still for everything I'd done with it. The first life had been about survival. The second life was about thriving. And I was done merely surviving.